The biggest thing with mobility and stability is if you have an issue in one joint, it's usually from another joint that's above or below.
Welcome to CrossFit East 10 Over the Bar podcast. The goal of this podcast is to answer common questions and encourage conversation between coaches, members, and the community.
Josh Brock here with head coach of CrossFit East 10, Rob Stacy, and Briddger Chatman, a local chiropractor here in the John City, Tennessee area. We're going to talk about mobility and stability. Go ahead and start us off here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on here, you guys. So, and if we're going to talk about stability and mobility, first let's start from the beginning. So let me just kind of, a quick definition of mobility, just so we know we're on the same path, is basically mobility is your range of motion and your movement. And stability is mainly your motor control, or I guess your static strength. But every joint in your body, every muscle in your body, they act different. So some will act more as mobility joints or muscles, some are more stabilizers or stability muscles or joints. So basically, if you guys can visualize this through the podcast, if you're going from bottom to top, each joint you'll notice it kind of alternates from mobility to stability. So if we start with the ankles, your ankles are a mobility joint. Your knees are a stability joint. Your hips are a mobility joint. Your low back is a stability joint. Your mid back is more of the mobility joint. And then your scapulas, they're actually stabilizers. A lot of people think that they're mobilizers, but they're more of this stabilizer joint and muscle. Your shoulders are mobility. Your elbow is more of the stability, and your wrists are the mobility. All these joints, muscles, everything should be equalized. So you should never have one more of mobility than stability, or vice versa. Each joint is basically that stabilizer or the mobilizer, and it acts as it's that support from the muscles. So basically, the biggest thing with mobility and stability is if you have an issue in one joint, it's usually from another joint that's above or below. So let's do, for instance, if your hips are a mobility issue, if you have an issue in your hips, they're mobility. That issue from your hips could be coming from your low back, it could be coming from the knees. So if your hips are mobility sequence, and your low back is supposed to be a stabilizer, but it's acting as a mobilizer, which means it's weak, that's going to cause issues in the hip or the low back. So a lot of times I'll have patients that come in and they complain of low back pain, and I'll start moving around their hips, and they'll be like, well, why are you touching my hips? I only have low back pain. Okay, well, you may have the low back pain, but that's the symptom. The issue could be coming from the hips, the knees. It could be coming from the mid-back or the thoracics as well. But just to paint an overall picture, let's think about babies when they're born. Basically, first off, you have two types of mobility and stability. So you're either born with it or you acquire it. And so let's think about babies, right? So they're born with it. They actually start with mobility. So imagine you lay a baby on the ground. The first thing he's going to start doing is just, he starts moving his fingers, his wrists. He starts flopping them in the air. Eventually, he starts crawling, right? So he tries to get in the all-four position over and over and over, and he finally gets it because what's happening is he has that mobility, or he or she has that mobility, and eventually that stabilizer is activated over time, repetitions over and over and over, right? So then he starts to try to walk, right? So first he learns how to stand, and repetitions of standing, he finally develops that lumbar stability so that he can actually hold that position. Then he starts to try to walk, so he takes that step because he's got the mobility in the hip, right? So the hips are mobility. So he tries to take that step, and what happens is he falls, right? Because that stability of the lumbar has not developed enough to continue to walk. So that's basically what happens. And if you think about babies, they have the perfect squat. They have the perfect, for most say, the perfect mobility, the perfect squat, the perfect crawl, everything, because they have not went through these faulty muscle movement patterns. And so what happens is as we develop, we move around, we sit, we play sports, we stand, we sleep. What happens is we develop these faulty muscle movement patterns. And that's basically things that are not perfect. And obviously nobody's perfect, but it's something you want to continue to work on. So what happens is when we develop these faulty muscle movement patterns, We develop this from trying to do enough strenuous activity and not having the right stability. Okay, so everybody always forgets to go back to that stability. So when you get older, what happens is you got all the mobility, right? You've got at least a lot of it. So then what you have to do is you continue to work on the stability throughout your life. Then after you develop that, then you can kind of start going up and up and up to elite athlete status, that kind of thing. But you always want to go back to stability. So basically, if you're asking how does chiropractic help with these faulty muscle movement patterns that we have developed, so let's think about it, right? So our nervous system controls every single cell, muscle, organ, everything in our entire body. So it's our powerhouse. So it's basically our brain connecting through our spinal cord, throughout the nerves to control every movement. So what happens is with injuries or sitting, standing the wrong way, what happens is that we develop compensations and we get out of alignment. Now, when we get out of alignment, what that does is that it pretty much interferes with the nervous system, so it creates an interference so that your brain can't talk to the rest of your body the way that it should, right? So if your brain's not telling say you're trying to clench both fists together, and your brain's not telling your left side to clench it as fast as your right side, then you're going to have an issue and it's going to be a lot slower. So that's kind of what I mean with that. But basically what chiropractic does is it's obviously an overall assessment and treatment of these misalignments. So that's why you want to stay aligned, right? So basically, if you're asking what kind of issues I see mainly with CrossFitters in my office, I will have to say the two biggest ones are low back and probably neck from after handstand push-ups. So the reason I see that the most is because if you'll remember, your low back, your lumbar spine, and your scapulas are stabilizers. Those are the main functions with deadlifts, or your low back with deadlifts, and then also with the handstand push-ups. So if you can't even do a handstand hold, you don't need to go in there and start trying to do the handstand push-ups. So basically something I would start with that is maybe an overhead kettlebell carry, and all you're doing is you're slowly walking around. And see, a lot of people don't want to go back to that because they're like, oh, well, I can do a kipping pull-up. Why would I walk around with a kettlebell above my head for 10 minutes? But the thing is you keep forgetting that you're losing that stability. And it's fun. Yeah, the mobility is the funnest part, obviously. But if you can't do the stability, then you're more at risk for injury. So those are probably two of the biggest ones I see. With the deadlifts, I would focus on, have somebody examine you. Have Rob or one of these guys examine you and watch your deadlift and see if your mobility is coming from your hip or your low back. It should be coming from your hip, but if you're using your low back for your mobility, then you're going to be in my office next week. And that's obviously fine with me, but...
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the carries and stuff like that, and that's something that we're big on, and I learned that from the guys from Active Life in New York who are chiropractors, who run a CrossFit gym. And I mean, I've talked to you about this 1,000 times about when I've come in, like, for those who are listening, they don't know, but I've had a serious low back injury before that I've had you basically take me through and coach me through it. But the very first thing I came in and told you, hey, the issue's the issue is in my lumbar, but I know that's not the place.
Right.
And then me and you talked about it for literally 5 minutes, and I understand what you're talking about, the upstream, downstream of an injury. And we worked on my hips for probably 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And it
Several times.
literally has not affected me since then because of the practices that you taught me.
Right.
And the stuff that I've studied. But talk a little bit about that stability, like in the scapula for handstand push-ups. I've talked to a lot of people about how, handstand push-ups actually come from your, the strength of your triceps and the strength of your lower and upper traps actually are what controls your handstand push-up. So those muscles, the upper and lower traps, are also around your scapular area. So what you're telling people is that they gotta have not only strength in that area to do the movement, but they also have to have that static strength.
Right.
So it's a difference between doing a sit-up and doing a plank.
Right.
That's what you're saying, right?
So, I mean, basically, you've got your shoulder blades. That's basically their job, is to hold everything and keep it into place. So your shoulder, obviously, you've got your shoulders above your head as you're doing the handstand push-up. But this shoulder blade is the thing that's actually reconnecting your shoulder or your shoulder girdle to your spine. So that's what's actually holding your spine static as you're going up and down, or even if you're walking. It's basically what's holding everything into alignment. But one more thing, I guess just to touch base on everything, as far as everybody listening and mainly CrossFitters, all I can tell you right now to keep you out of my office, work on your stability and mobility evenly. Maintain that stability and mobility. And the second thing I want to say is, a lot of times I'll have patients or a patient come in and they get adjusted, right? So they did deadlifts, they have low back pain, they get adjusted. And I say, all right, take it off or take a few days off. Don't really push the symptoms. If you're in pain, be easy. And then they'll come back, oh, I felt awesome 100% when I left here, so I went to the gym the next day or two. I did deadlifts again, and it's back out, man, it's back out. Well, here's the thing, okay? So when you get the adjustment, so what that does is that gets everything back into alignment. All that does is that decreases the symptoms because it's removing the nervous system interference. But remember, you just had an injury, right? So your stability has completely vanished. Maybe not completely, but it's vanished. So what you have to do is, so the nervous system is now being able to activate the stability. You have to start back with the stability. You cannot just go back into a full range of motion, full weight deadlift right after that. So it just like when you're little and you have to develop that stability over time, over getting up and falling over and over and over, you have an injury, you get an adjustment, you work on that stability over and over and over until it's back where it is before you start doing the mobility again. So other than that, just try to recreate stability after an injury before mobility is expressed fully.
All right, comes this time on our podcast when we have a featured member, and today's featured member is Brittany Stevens. How you doing, Brittany?
I'm good. How are you?
All right, I'm good as well. How long have you done CrossFit?
Well, I've done it on and off for like 4 years, but I've been here at East 10 for 3.
So what is your favorite thing about CrossFit?
I just love like how versatile it is, and just like how you don't have to have like an athletic background to do it. And I just think you'll find your niche in it somewhere, whether it's the gymnastics portion or the cardio, the running. And I mean, you can be, 16 or 80 and you can still do it. And it's just a great community to be a part of.
So tell everybody that's listening how CrossFit's affected you personally. What I mean by that, like, you've posted some stuff on, if nobody knows your Instagram, that's awesome, that other female athletes need to see themselves. But tell them a little bit about where you came from and where you hope to go one day.
Well, I started as an avid runner, and it kind of became, it was during the time I was battling an eating disorder, and I just was not healthy with my nutrition and my exercising. I was not eating and then running, miles and miles a day, and just I thought skinny was the beauty of it. And I hated that part of my life. It was making me just feel really down. So I just wanted to be healthy, and I saw CrossFit and I saw these women who were just strong in every aspect, and mental and physical, and so it just made me want to just make food my friend, and make just exercising more of a fun activity rather than a strenuous have to do it, have to reach this level of weight and stuff. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the cool things that you've done and you found out is that you're pretty decent at it. Like, you're pretty good at it. And what I mean by that is you do competitions. I actually had you as my teammate in a competition, and we did.
That's fun.
I think that it was your first competition, and I think that we did pretty well. I mean, there was 15 teams, and we came 5th. And it was your first RX competition ever. So a lot of people don't realize how nervous you were that day. So let's talk about that. Tell them about your first ever competition, because you're the first competitor that we have at our gym beyond. And what I mean by competitor, somebody that's been avidly doing competitions lately.
Well, my first ever competition was actually the summer bash we had, and I was with Jenny, and that was during the time I was still not eating correctly, and I ended up passing out at that one.
Yep, remember that.
Yeah. But I learned a lot from that one. But the RX one, I was in a much better mental state, and it was just, at first I was intimidated by the girls, because I was like, dang, they were lifting this weight, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never even attempted that weight. But it was more of an inspiration, I want to get to that part, be that
exactly
level.
And that's something that we'll eventually talk about in podcasting. That's something that I love that you brought up, was you didn't view it as, like, at first it was intimidation, but you viewed it as doing the competition to learn and to
Right.
see that you can go somewhere else. So
Right.
that's why I try to tell people, like, it's always good to test things out. And whether it be if you're just doing it for fitness, you want to test out the RX workout that day, it's completely fine to do that because you want to put yourself in a position to see where you can go. Because if you never try, you're never going to do.
Right.
So that's a big saying I always have is can't, never, could do. So
Right.
if you're telling yourself you can't, you're never going to do it, period, anyways.
And also doing my first individual comp was a whole
Yeah,
another ball game too.
yeah, people don't realize that she went to one of my friends, Justin Graham. They hold the Independence Games. It's one of the largest competitions in the Southeast. And Brittany actually stepped up and said, she approached me. I didn't even ask you to do the competition.
Yeah.
You actually approached me and said, I want to do this, which I was thrown back and I was like excited. And I felt like you did very good that day. You and Elizabeth performed really well. Maybe not the results we were hoping for, but
Right.
but as far as experience and putting ourselves out there, that's another thing I've been saying a lot lately. You put
Yeah.
yourself out there in a
Right.
position that a lot of other people aren't going to do in the first place.
Right.
Especially, you might have some people in the area that have these top scores in the open, and they won't even show up at a competition that size, and you actually went and did it, which I find in the long run, as an athlete, you're going to grow more than those people.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I agree.
so I commend you for that.
Well, thank you.
All right. So, what is your favorite thing to do outside the gym?
I guess my typical just Netflix and chill. Just like to just not that kind of Netflix and chill.
Netflix and chill. All right. So everybody that's listening to this podcast,
Not
just
that
like-
Netflix and chill.
Yeah, just to let you listen. Just to listen, guys. Brittany is like a little sister to me, so that doesn't open the doors up for more Netflix and chill invites. Just to let you know that. All right. So.
Not by myself in my just
Yeah.
not talking to anyone, entertaining anyone, just watching
Exactly.
Netflix.
Brittany, thank you for coming on.
yeah, thank you.
I always like talking to you. We have a really close relationship, a brother-sister relationship.
Oh,
And look forward to hearing from you and seeing you grow even more with us.
Thank you.